car in this?
So let me introduce myself. My name is Robin Rosine. I am the Organizational Change Manager for the Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs. I have some certifications. The one you're probably going to care about the most is ProSci Change Management. I'm a practitioner and working on my advanced instructor. I'm also a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. I have certificates of completion in project management and business analysis. I've been doing this work for a while. I'll just say it's been a while. Like, I don't want to age myself too much. Right? I am a little bit more personal about me. I am a mother of two, a boy and a girl. I am a nana of 5, 2 girls, 3 boys. And I have 4 dogs and a cat. I got a big, huge family and a lot of love. For my hobbies, I paint, I dance, I do anything I possibly can to find enjoyment in life. It's just who I am. Now I'm going to get a little vulnerable. That's usually the things that people say at conferences, right? But let me get a little bit more vulnerable. I'm a recovering drug addict. This is a little bit different than some of the sessions that you've heard about so far. The individuals that you've seen are providers to people like me. I take a slightly different turn for you today, in that I was probably somebody that you haven't. My drug of choice was methamphetamine. I know I look it, right? I really used a lot of different things to really call one drug a drug of choice. It was more of a walking pharmacy than anything else. My career started when I was 21, and I ended at 25. So it was kind of short, but it had a huge impact for the rest of my life. It really did. Before I started using, I was raising 2 children. I had a nice little apartment. I came from an upper middle class home. I had education. I was actually graduated from boarding school at the age of 16. I really didn't have any excuses. I had good parents. I had a good upbringing. There was nothing stopping me. I just decided to do this thing. I could defend my actions. I could justify. Through recovery, one of the things that I've learned is that this kind of thing doesn't matter anymore. And it's okay for me to be me. It's okay for me to have my history. In a few short years, from 21 to 25, I fell in love with an abuser. I also divorced him, but I fell in love with him. I lost my job. I lost my house. I couldn't get housing because of the choices that I made in life. I didn't have a driver's license, and even if I did, I didn't have a vehicle to drive. In fact, the only thing that I can think of that really didn't happen to me at that point in life was I never got arrested. Now, I'm not saying that I shouldn't have, but I didn't. I was sexually assaulted many, many times. I would like to say that that was just once, but it wasn't. I had to learn how to be a survivor in a very difficult world. My drug addiction created some other traumas, mental health issues. I destroyed any support system I could have possibly had with my family or my friends. And the things that I'm telling you today are things that your clients deal with every day, at least one. At least one of the things that I've said, you see every single day. Now, you can assume that since I'm standing here, things might have changed. You may assume that I became the best parent ever. And my children are quite accomplished. In fact, one of them works in the foster care system, and one of them teaches little boys how to be ninjas. I love watching my grandchildren grow up. I have the best job ever. If somebody wants a job at WDBA, I'm excited. I have the best job ever working with people that I absolutely love to work with. You can assume that I got some housing. And you could also assume that maybe I went a step further and was actually able to buy my own home, 5 acres in Shelton with a little creek running through it. Okay. Probably got some education. Probably did a lot of different things. And I wouldn't be able to provide you these types of assumptions if I hadn't been able to improve my life, right? If I hadn't gone through some type of change. We call this continuous improvement in my world. But I ask you a question. How did I get from that to that? How do we help anyone get from that to that? Right, that's a big change. At least in my eyes when I look at those pictures and I remember what life was. As you know, there's all kinds of counseling and wellness options out there. Alcoholics, Narcotics Anonymous, inpatient, outpatient treatment options, religious, community practices, nonprofits, and more. And there is a good chance that someone in this room works for an organization that actually tried to help me. And all of these programs offer an incredible start to someone who recognizes they need a change. But what happens when an individual hasn't even gotten to the point where they can make a decision to change? Maybe the person doesn't know that they need to improve their situation. I didn't. Had no clue. Maybe they're in complete denial that there's a problem at all. Maybe they were like me. They felt hopeless, lost, sad. And sometimes it's just a little overwhelming to take that first step. In my own life, this kind of happened organically. I didn't know that there were tools or resources or concepts out there that could help me. I was young and dumb, and that was okay. But after this long journey I chose to take myself down, I found this concept called change management. And I was working in a professional atmosphere. And at first, change management was explained to me as a way to get people to buy into changes that are occurring in a professional environment. So this could be a technical change. It could be a business process change. It could be a strategy change. But the focus was primarily based on that professional environment. And I began to learn about a company called ProSci. So if you're interested in change management at all, ProSci.com. That's where most of my, not all, but where most of my information comes from when it comes to change management. And we're actually going to lead you through this concept called ADCAR today that came from pro-size methodologies. One day I was doing some reflection, and I realized unwittingly that my recovery had a direct correlation to pro-size ADCAR model. And for those of you who don't know, ADCAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And today, as I said, we're going to walk you through this journey. We're also going to give you some suggestions. So if you are close to a piece of paper on the chairs, I passed out a few. For those who don't have the lovely handout, you can certainly write different notes, but this piece of paper will help lead you through the conversation today. And the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is pull out a pen, because it's a piece of paper that maybe might need to be written on. And I want you to think of a change that's happening in your world today, any change. Now, you don't have to be as dramatic as drug addiction, okay, because not everybody has that struggle. But anything that's happening, it could be professional. Right? It could be a job promotion. It could be a business process that's changing. In the last couple of years, how many times have we had a change because of COVID? It could be something personal, maybe a wedding, or you have a new family member coming in, a child, or something of the like. But just think of a change. And I want you to keep this change in focus as we have this conversation. The first part of my journey was recognizing that I was suffering and that others were suffering around me. And isn't he just adorable? This is my 3-year-old son when he was 3. One day my son came to me out of his room. He took one look at me and said, "Mama, you look sick." My mind was blown. My 3-year-old, my baby, knows that I've been using. He knows that we're not living our best life. He made me aware of a problem. Remember that ad card? He made me aware that there was a problem. And in change management, that really is the first step, is becoming aware that there is an issue or a change that's going to occur. Awareness in the ADCAR model is knowing there is a problem. Something needs to change or is going to change. In many situations, this idea of becoming aware can create an emotional reaction. And whether you're speaking about a personal or professional change, that doesn't matter. The fact is that people have emotional reactions to change. There's almost a grief process that takes place. We feel as if we're losing a piece of ourselves. And, I've seen this occur on project teams. And I've also seen this when someone gets married and is losing their singularity. I've seen it when someone buys a new car or a house and a sticker shock, and I'm not going to have the cash flow. Once people become aware, they might experience denial or anger or confusion when that change is first introduced. At this paramount place we have an opportunity for mental clarity. It's this opportunity to recognize that things could be better than they are right now. Or they could be different than they are right now. And we ask ourselves some questions that can take us from this emotional state into a more logical state. Questions like, what needs to change? Why is the change needed? And what's that risk of not changing? And this last question was huge for me. Huge. What is the risk of not changing? For me, it was survival. But think about business processes, right? The risk of not changing is in this community is that maybe you're not going to be able to reach more people. You're not going to be able to help more individuals, right? The impact of not changing can be huge. In retrospect, I really wish that someone was around to ask me this question. And to really help me recognize that there is a moment of mental clarity. That you do have that second to decide that this is a real thing. Now, my 3-year-old son, as cute as he may be, has no idea that I was on drugs. He had no idea that I was doing this horribly detrimental thing, not just to myself, but to him. Right? However, he made me aware of the problem. He made it visible. I could see it in that cute little face. And these questions that I ask really help solidify the idea that there's a need. So on your handout, I want you to take a minute. And those questions are written on your handout, and I want you to consider. With the change that you jotted down, why is it important to change? What's that risk of not changing? Okay? People so upset about this question that they're throwing their piece of paper on the floor. It's good. It's fine. Oh, finally a giggle. So what do you guys think about awareness?
Necessary.
It's necessary? Yes, sir.
Awareness to me seems to be only part of the issue, the problem with awareness, because if you're not willing to do anything about it, you can be aware that you have an issue for years and years and years.
Absolutely, and we're going to get into desire next. What else? What about your change? Did you come up with an aha when you asked yourself that question? I didn't hear it. It was cute, but I didn't hear it.
Already aware of it.
You were already aware of it. What's the risk of not doing it?
Kind of like what you said, not being able to reach the amount of people.
Okay.
Figure to go.
Who else? Yes, sir.
I suppose also like connection. It's not aware that you're losing that connection.
Absolutely. It's amazing how many people in your professions and in my professions, if we don't have if we don't have that connection to each other, that we suffer, right? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I just think, well, I think this is going to tie into the next one a little bit too. But I also think that the awareness, I feel like for certain people, it might also be like a source of catastrophication. Like, you know, it's like, oh, like this is like being made aware of something that becomes like the worst thing that could possibly happen. But I think that perspective is also important to have, so we can go all deep in.
Absolutely, and that's an emotional reaction to being overwhelmed, right? And I can tell you that one of my biggest things in my journey was fear. And you know fear can freeze someone, right? It was huge for me. Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that popped in my head afterwards was the risk of not changing would create not having passion anymore. Losing your passion.
Absolutely. Well, I can say by the time I got to that point, when I became aware, I was dead inside. So you want to talk about not having passion, right? Yes, ma'am.
So I put that because of mine smoking.
Oh,
So the risk of illness, death, and not living my full life.
yeah. And especially for smoking. So I actually went through a process. I do vape, but I went through a process to quit smoking at one point. Was a non-smoker for about 2 years. And the biggest thing for me was that I couldn't run around the block. And that was my risk of not being able to do something if somebody was chasing me and I couldn't get away. All right. So let's look at desire. So once there's awareness that a change needs to happen, we really start focusing on that desire piece, right? Giggles in the back. I really had no love for the idea that my son knew I was using, or that he was going to be raised by an addict. I mean, where I came from, someone like me was the lowest of the low, right? I was being supported by a boyfriend who wasn't exactly a wonderful person. I had no independence, I had no job, I had no money, I had no transportation. You guys heard that story, right? I also had no idea how to get out of the situation I had put myself in. None. I had no one to reach out to at that point. It really did feel hopeless. I felt very alone. And I was scared I wasn't going to survive. And my dad actually has told a story to me about how he would go for the morgue. He would just wait. I knew I couldn't take on a major change without accomplishing some other things in my life. But it's really hard to break a cycle, right? I had this thing that allowed me to escape life. It was pretty awesome. I didn't have to participate in my own world. I had a lack of appetite, and having some increased productivity meant I was a size 5. I thought I was all that in a bag of chips. That was quite creepy. Okay, at least that's what I thought. Most friendships and relationships were built on the use or the acquisition of my drug of choice, and I thought that this was my support system. I had no idea that there was something different, something new. So leaving this life that I had built meant that I was going to lose everyone and everything to make it happen. At least that's what I thought. Now, there are some things here that could create desire. I could build an independent life and not have to depend on others to maintain things like housing and food and all of those wonderful things. I could have a career that I could be proud of. I could actually be a decent parent, right? But there were some barriers that I had problems all around. Vanity. If I quit using, I'd gain weight. In a woman's world, that's a huge thing. I don't know about men, but in a woman's world, that's a huge thing, right? Loss of what I considered friendships at the time. Would I feel even more lost and alone? Would that happen? A lot of those barriers for me, again, were based in fear. Fear of change, more than the capability of change. And desire, when we're building desire, it does not mean that we're all in. Okay? It means that, well, it doesn't mean that we're excited. In fact, I was quite scared. But it does mean that I'm willing to take a personal choice to engage. Now think about your business processes, expanding into your community, right? You have to make a personal choice, which means you have to find your passion within, and only you have energy over that passion. And if you don't have passion about what you're doing, then maybe that's not the change you should be focusing on. So I decided to try, against all odds. Really, the pros outweigh the cons in this situation. When working with teams, an explanation is provided that if you can reach 80% of your impacted population, then you have successfully created desire for the change. Because you're not going to wipe out resistance completely. It does not happen. So 80%, if I can get to 80%. Now, turn that inward. If I can convince 80% of self to make a change, then I'm probably more willing to move forward. But that takes thought. That takes me out of the emotional state. It puts me into a logical state. And I have to actually do some considering. And sometimes that's not easy work, and that's why all of you are employed.
Thank you.
So if I look and I can convince myself that 80% of self is willing to engage, then I can probably have a positive impact moving forward, correct? That makes sense? We have to understand there's a desire to change first. We have to weigh the pros and cons. We must understand what is going to be holding us back. So, let's focus on me losing my support system. I'll give you an example. The question was asked, will you lose the system or will the players change? Wow, that's huge. That's gigantic. Because now it's not about loss. Now it's about how can I make it different. It's a different problem, right? Huge. So what actions would those new players exhibit? And what do I consider support? Now, I can tell you that in the beginning, what I considered support was somebody who would give me a bump to make it through the day, right? Or they'd give me a place to sleep, or they'd give me some food. But when I became aware of the change that was needed, and I decided to start building that desire, that support looked like, who can give me a safe place to sleep tonight? A safe place to sleep tonight. Who will give me advice when I hit a bad spot? Where am I going to get resources for somebody to watch my kids while I go gain an education, where I go gain employment? All of this sounding a little familiar? See this every day? Right? Isn't it great that ADCAR is nothing new? This is not a new idea. This is work that you do every day. If things weren't in place, would I find more value in the change than I would in what I was doing today? Could I hold my head higher? Could I be proud of myself? What are those pros and cons? So my dad became my focal point when I started contemplating, and my dad is my rock. That man's amazing. He's calm, he's consistent, he was a professional, worked for Weyerhaeuser for 23 years, and then opened his own business. He is the man. Right? He had a brand, this image, this persona that he could be proud of. So I started asking myself, how could I make him proud of me? Because that was important to him. And he's what I looked up to. So again, I was focusing on communication. We focus our questions on diving deeper into each barrier. We don't have to have a plan at this point. We just have to find a way to get the person to yes. Yes, I'm willing to engage. So in the desire section on your handout, just take a few minutes, and with your change, why don't you consider some pros and cons? What's a pro of that change, and maybe what's some things that you need to do some problem solving around? I love that scarf. What are some thoughts that you have?
I put the same thing in both pros and cons.
That happens, right? So what is it?
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle?
Yeah.
I could say that was a pro and a con in my world, right? So for me, my lifestyle at the time was, partying, having fun. It was a grand old time. And the lifestyle that I wanted to have with this new change had different value, and I had to determine which one was more important at that point. So the problem solving went a little bit deeper, pros and cons to each one of those, right? What is the pros and cons to living in that party lifestyle? What are the pros and cons to being a professional, raising my children, and having a job? And there are pros and cons to both, I'm just saying. I mean, if you've ever raised children, you know this. What else? Did that reach your desire stage? Got you there? Okay. Is this hard work?
Yeah.
So what would happen if you put this in front of one of your clients?
You'd be stuck in awareness.
They'd be stuck in Take some hand holding, right? Who else?
it's a useful tool.
Okay,
What breaks it down into pieces that they can actually
Yeah.
digest,
Yes.
rather than looking at the elephant, they're taking the elephant one bite at a time to eat the elephant.
Absolutely.
yes, sir.
Also gonna mention too that like frequently, like in discussions with clients who might be tackling a lot of these items, but I think it's also good to kind of, give them the tool, right? Really inspire that like personal investment, something that discussions might talk about goals a lot, but actually having I guess effort into
Right? They own their own story at that point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's part of it is, and I'm just gonna paraphrase what he said, 'cause I love that, is actually allowing them to blaze their own path to that decision without leading them. What do you think is important? Why is that important? What happens if you don't do that? They're making that decision. It's almost Socratic. You're leading them, not leading them, but giving them a chance to make that decision on their own, which then gives them more ownership to it, which then gives them more buy-in.
It helps them to be invested
Exactly.
in the change that they're working towards.
Right.
Yeah. And I have a hand over here.
I was just thinking about energy, the energy that they can put into it.
So I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm not going to pretend to be. But what I see in this is that as a healthcare provider, you guys take on a lot of energy. And this gives you an opportunity to separate your energy from that other person so that they are taking control of that situation, so they are not transferring that ownership to you. I can tell you I tried that. It didn't work because I had a good social worker, but I did try it, So it just really gives that opportunity to allow them to own the content and for you to own the structure. Yes.
I think it also is teaching them the structure,
Yes.
right? So it's not only that I have the structure, but I'm teaching them the structure. So they don't need me anymore when they come into the space of change, of wanting change, of hearing I need change. Oh, okay, these are the steps I can take. And that's my goal working with somebody, so they don't need me anymore. To give them the tools so they don't need me.
So I will tell you that one of my greatest goals in my job is to work myself out of a job. For people to understand how to recognize improvement opportunities in their own processes and to continue researching, learning, and building off of those processes. And so absolutely, I totally get where you're coming from. Just being able to say, you got this, is a fantastic feeling. Anyone else? You can really tell that you guys had lunch before this. I had a small lunch because I was afraid of that. Yes, ma'am.
Were you on the comm?
Go for it.
I was like, but it's hard.
Ah,
I want to, but it's hard.
is that really a con? Yes.
I think the question when you have that as an answer is what makes it hard.
Yes.
I think too, just labeling it what it really is, which is fear of the unknown. We just don't even know what that change is going to look like, and that's scary because we at least, even though it's not healthy what we're doing, we at least know what to expect.
Absolutely.
True.
I love that question of, is it hard? Well, yeah, it's hard. Anything worth it is hard. Were you going to say something?
I was gonna say, when somebody ever asks me, is it hard? I like to ask them, you've done hard things before. What's one hard thing you've done before? Look how strong you are. You can do hard things. I've seen it.
You can do hard things. Yes, ma'am.
So we all work with veterans, and all the veterans have been through boot camps, and for many of us, boot camp was probably the hardest thing that, or at least at the time that, that we'd gone through in our young lives, right? I did Marine Corps boot camp, I did 13 weeks, and while I was going through it, man, it was hard. But I remember when I graduated, I had somebody come up and ask me about it. They wanted to know, so how was it hard? And I had to stop and think for a minute. And I was like, you know what? That really was not hard at all. That was really easy to get through.
You were the first person I've ever heard say that boot camp was easy to get through. That's amazing.
But the point is that we all work with veterans, and so if their answer is it's hard, well, you did boot camp. Is this harder than boot camp?
Well, it's hard while you're doing it, but when you're done and you reflect on it, it seems
Yeah.
like it wasn't that hard.
It wasn't that hard because you know, when you're going through it, it's hard because you don't realize that you have the capability of doing it. And then when you get done and you can look back and reflect on it, you realize, wow, that really wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
And it's funny because like I had the same thought at the end where it was like I looked back and I'm like, how the fuck did I get through that? But it was like, I'm glad I did though. Like, you know.
So I didn't say the same thing about my dream.
I have no idea how I got through that, but I did. Thank God.
Those are almost the exact same words I used. Yes.
I'm curious how you think that self-esteem plays into this, because like I have a client, he's got nothing positive to say about himself. Everything negative you can think of, he truly believes it. And so I can't tell, like, is he never going to be able to make change in his life until he goes to therapy and feels better about himself, or do you think there's any opportunity for change before that?
So I am a persistent, positive manifester. I never believe the answer is no. Okay, so I never believe that someone will never be able to do anything. I know a lot of people in my life who negativity is their world that they choose to live in. Flip it on them. Which is worse? What's harder? Do you think it might be easier if you have a place to live? You don't have to personalize this idea that life is going to be a bowl of cherries. Keep it in that logical thought process of, is this or this, these two external things, which one's better? And that gives them a chance to answer the question without having to look at themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
But I also think sometimes, we work with homeless veterans, and sometimes they've been homeless so long, they've been beaten down so long. One of the things that I always use, as a fellow veteran, I look at them and I talk to them about, remember who you are. That, you were just talking about the whole boot camp experience. I have veterans from the Vietnam era that have had a hard life, and we kind of go backwards, and I start off with remember who you are and what you've accomplished before this bad thing happened, knowing that you can rise above it, even though you're at this low level. At some point in your life, you operated at a high level, and remember that you were able to do that.
I've also been in situations where I've had someone that, was very negative, had, negative self-thoughts, whatever, right? And so helping them to talk through that sometimes and fight back that negative thought. Even if it's finding just a small thing that you did and then focusing on that and saying, hey, did you do this? How did you do this, right? And helping them to take ownership of some of the positive things instead of focusing on the negative, right? Because negativity begets negativity, and positivity begets positivity.
Yeah, having
conversations about their strength and resilience and how they've seen it in their lives can be really empowering.
In an earlier presentation today, I heard this concept of toxic positivity that I found very interesting. This idea that, you know, we're constantly trying to make people better, we're trying to, you know, we want them to be positive or feel good about themselves, right? This is a thing. And I appreciated that conversation because it did make me reflect on this journey and your question. And is it really about always trying to get to this positive place? Or is it about improving what's going on today? And honestly, if I can improve anything at all, that's better than it was, wasn't it?
That's logical though. And there's a bit of physiology that goes
Yes.
into the positive thinking.
Yes.
That our body actually reacts to what is happening in our brain, not necessarily like, example, you're sitting at a beach, that's your favorite place to be. That just imagining that, thinking about that as physiologically beneficial as being at the beach. So when you start to think positively, you don't think positively for positive's sake. You're doing it to make a change, like you're talking about, in the way that you process things, in the way that you view life and things. When we talk negatively to ourselves, that changes our physiology also to do the fight or flight chemistry. Anyway. So I personally have experienced change in my life by talking to myself differently, by looking at myself differently, and taking words like stupid and turning it into something different. Not stupid. I can't remember the word I used to replace it, but I literally, when I'm struggling, will write down the word, cross it out, and change it to a word that's positive. And that physiologically has changed me. So toxic positivity is different. It's denying your feelings, denying that there's a problem. I am just trying to be cheerful in every situation. You don't have to be cheerful in every situation, but you don't want to stay in the negative emotion.
So, and that'll actually push us into knowledge. Yes, right here. Yes.
I want to be aware that also that the way I live and what is positive for me is very different than what might be positive and a lifestyle somebody else chooses. And so it's their journey and their pathway, and my job is not to impress what I think is happy and what I think a life looks like onto that person, right? So what is change? What is good for that person? I don't know. They're the only ones who know that, right? If right now living in a tent is good for them, that's not for me to choose. What for me to choose, what I feel I'm there to help is they're coming to me or I'm outreaching to them. What area, is there anything that they need or they want? And then focus on that area. So I think we all have to be very, very careful not to impose what we think is, right? This is what it looks like. Because I work with a lot of people that are active substance use, in active substance use. Right? It's not, I have to be compassionate and non-judgmental without the expectation of change.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know what they're getting from that. And what if I take that away and that's actually worse for them? They're not at that space.
You mean
So
your job is to manage structure, not content?
Yeah, so I just want to be careful when we talk. I always like to put this in change, that it's not our change we're putting on someone. And then you get into that, like you have to feel good, you have to be happy. Well, if they want to be grumpy, let them be grumpy. That's the space they want to be in. I don't always want to be happy.
But use that to your advantage at the same time.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that.
Psychological manipulation can be a very positive thing in the world. I'm just saying.
I just want to be careful that it's their change and not mine.
Absolutely.
and always have that in the forefront of my mind. Am I stepping, and I do it all the time. I step into my want for them instead of their want for themselves. And I have to be really careful for that. So when it has to change, I always try to keep that in the forefront.
Nice. So that goes to a concept that ProSci teaches on a regular, that organizations don't change, people do. That each individual has to build their desire, they have to buy in, they have to choose to participate before the change can actually occur or before you can see a true return on investment of the change. And that true return on investment can look a lot of different ways. Remember that I'm taking a professional business model when it comes to change management and applying it to my my choice transition, right? But you can apply this to literally anything in your world. So let's go ahead and move on to knowledge. So we're aware that a change needs to happen. We've decided to do something about it. That's pretty cool. So now let's look at that knowledge. And I can tell you that I needed training on how not to be a drug addict. I became agoraphobic. And I had to learn how to walk out of my house. I had to learn how to eat food again. Right? The small little things. I had to learn how to smile in the mirror. I went to treatment classes. I went to outpatient treatment. I was raising children. So going inpatient really wasn't an option. I had kind of a story that supports this. So I went to outpatient treatment. And I went to treatment 3 times a week, and then I went once a week, and then I went once a month. And you guys know the cycle, right? You've seen it. So I did that. I attended AA and NA meetings. I did my 30 and 30, and then continued with that path. After I got to a point where I was kind of solid in the whole, living without using, I was sent to school to learn how to re-enter the workforce. I was given money for rent, for clothing. They gave me a haircut. I was so happy about that dang haircut. Really is the little things.
Sometimes. I had to learn how not to engulf myself into this negative lifestyle. I had to practice self-talk. Right? It's a whole different world at that point. As expected, I found out that the people that I thought were my support network really weren't. It's amazing how quickly they disappeared. I mean, it was like rats on a ship, I'm telling you. They were gone. The minute I said I don't want to do this, or that I wasn't going to hang out for it, it was magic. People vanished. I was establishing a knowledge base on how to be sober. And this process really considered all implications. I talked about a few. And this knowledge phase is all about learning. This may mean the development of skills or the development of behaviors. And I can tell you that external assistance may be required to ensure success. In fact, I leaned a lot on external assistance. And for me, in my struggle, this is where your organizations make the most impact. So you can have the conversation up until this point and try to get them to build that desire, and that's great. But until they actually choose to personally engage in their own change, there's not a lot you can do, right? And that's okay. Just let them keep coming back and having that conversation. It's fine.
But this is where you actually get to help that 1% of the society that you're trying to help. I can tell you, I had state assistants, I had nonprofits. My family started stepping up a little bit. They didn't trust me, but they started stepping up just a little bit. I had to learn how to walk and talk again. That's exactly what it felt like. I relearned simple manners and etiquette. I went back to my Southern roots, that yes ma'am, no sir. Just so that I could practice being in society in a different way. There is no one perfect timeline or set of achievements at this stage. Everyone has their own steps. And again, change is based on an individual, not an organization, and not someone else's opinions, as you brought up. And this is true even in project teams. If an individual decides not to participate in a change, the change will not occur. Or there will be a reduced return on investment. I don't care what the change is. But as I worked through each barrier, I was able to become more and more self-sufficient, and that was pretty awesome. And the knowledge phase is where I actually put a working action plan into place. What's the first step? What's the next? And for me, it was day to day. Okay, today I have to make a phone call. If I make a phone call, then I've accomplished something. And the next day is to get to the appointment. And the next day is to go to an assessment. And the next day is to go to a class. And every single day, I had to have this to-do list so that I could stay focused. And I had to have someone hold me accountable to that to-do list, right? And sometimes that was family, and sometimes it was friends, and sometimes it was my counselor or my social worker, right? If you don't show up today, this is what your result will be, and you get to make a decision from there. And a lot of times those decisions were not what I wanted. I was going to lose money, or I was going to lose housing, or I was going to lose something, right? And so I showed up because I didn't want to go back. We get to make a decision on if we're going to slow down or if we're going to speed up. Do I need to take a pause for a minute and really feel what's happening right now before I can take the next step? Or am I doing pretty good and I can continue to move forward? I have to be able to make those decisions, and sometimes that's a daily reflection. Sometimes that's a minute by minute. If anybody's done any type of AANA work, it's not about one day at a time sometimes. Sometimes it's a micro millisecond at a time, right? But who do I connect with? Who can help me right now? What are my resources? What do I need to accomplish? And I build this working action plan that never stops. That's why we call it a working action plan. Is because just because you put something on it doesn't mean that you're done. It means that you got through that particular item on your action plan. Now, this happens in projects teams too. You start off with this wonderful list of all these wonderful things that you're going to do to create a great business process. Don't laugh at me, Kalani. Kalani's on one of our project teams right now. And the project team is like, cool, this is it. If we do these things, we're done. I'm going to let you think that. It's going to be great. I had to be very specific. So every Sunday I'd sit down and I'd determine what I need to accomplish for the week ahead. I needed people in place to really show up. Let me know if I was doing good or bad. I needed acceptance. And frankly, I needed somebody to tell me when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. Because it's really easy to fall back if somebody isn't saying, hey, where are you? Did you do this thing? I didn't understand what commitment to a cause was anymore. And so I needed that extra support. I didn't know how to value myself over others. Like I actually had value. I didn't know that. I was not making decisions in my own life. I was not guiding my own life. Other people were doing that for me. And remember I said I wanted to be independent? That's kind of a joke, isn't it? So without measuring those pros and cons and desire, we can't really determine what skills we need to obtain or what steps we need to take, right? Because you don't have a good understanding of the things that are going to reward you and the things that you have to problem solve. You can't determine what's holding you back if you don't have those pros and cons. So I want you to take another few minutes in the knowledge section. Should be on the back of the page. And you got some questions there. So what steps in the change that you're considering now? What are some steps that you can take now? Who do you need to speak to or what action do you need to take? And when can you commit to doing it? Now, the idea of knowledge and ability for me kind of go hand in hand. So, I had to reach a point where my basic essentials were being taken care of before I could do any type of goal setting or to know what done would look like. Okay? And getting to ability is really your go live state. It's when I can actually function in this new role that I've been working on. For ability for me. My first job out of recovery was at the Department of Corrections. Kind of funny, right? Like they're the ones who actually administer the punishment for people like me. Thought that was awesome. I moved away from some toxic relationships. My children and I got a little apartment just for us. And we even sat down, and remember, my son's 4 at this age. So we sat down and we had this conversation about what we were going to allow and what we were not going to allow in our house. So now my children have a partnership in my recovery with me. And now it's a community growing together instead of me trying to do it by myself. As I started getting healthy, my friendships changed dramatically. Like the people I was hanging out with had goals. Some of them were going to school. Some of them had cars. That was so neat. Like I didn't have to walk everywhere. What do you say? They know how to have fun. And fun sober is so much more entertaining.
Absolutely. And you get to remember it.
And people do some really crazy things sober, I'm just saying. And they don't don't have an excuse, so it's even more fun to make fun of the next day. And I really knew that I was through this phase when I started having dreams about the future. What did I want to be when I grew up? Ability for me is a measurement point. Do we know what done truly looks like? Did we do the things we set out to do? Do we need to make any adjustments? And I'm going to go back to that first question. Do we know what done looks like? I've said this a few times now. What needs to be in place to be considered successful? And we've been working on our action plan for a while. And if we do this work well, if we really think about what done looks like, then as we build our action plan, those two things work together. Because you have this working action plan, and now you're going to set some goals for what done looks like, and then everything on your action plan is about moving towards those goals. Okay? So I use SMART goals for this, and I'm going to tell you that every year on my birthday, I do reflection about my goals. I can really only set a goal for 1 year. I've learned this about myself. Anything over 1 year, and I lose commitment and determination. Knowing this about myself really helps me get through the day. Your clients may be only able to set a week. Okay. They may be able to set a month. Good for them. Right? I've been sober for 21 years. I can't go beyond a year. I'm okay with that. Now, it does not mean that I don't have dreams. And I set 5-year dreams, and my goals usually reflect those, but I don't call them goals because that throws me off. Sometimes it's just a language change, right? But we need to be able to see an end in sight. So for those of you who aren't aware, you may see the language, you may see different language when it comes to SMART goals, but it's really about making those goals specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And I'm going to lead you into the story about my dad as that focal point for me. Remember that? Okay. So he had a brand. He had a persona. He had something he could be proud of. And I use this positive example in my life to demonstrate my own success. Part of his brand was that he held a stable job with a company for 23 years, right? Before he started his own business. And so looking at the idea of a SMART goal, I decided I wanted to find stable employment, specific, right? That I held for 25 years or more, because I can't live without competition. I have to one up my daddy, just saying. But that's measurable. It had to be in the field that I had skill sets in. And with no higher level education at that particular time, I didn't know what that would look like, but I like to organize things, and I like to have control over other people. And so an office assistant seemed like a good idea, because that's what we do, right? And so I did. I started off as an office assistant, and I was able to work my way up. And this whole idea of employment, keep me safe and sober, so it's relevant. And I really wanted to get a job within a year. That's timing. So you see how I developed that? So guess what's going to happen now? You have a piece of paper, right? You get the hint. So you can look at your goal, and you can start thinking about your SMART goal a little bit. And while you're doing that, I would like to let you know that I am 5 years away from that 25-year goal. My dad worked for 23 years. I am 3 years away from my from beating my dad. I'm very happy about that. Very happy about that. And when this comes out on YouTube, he's going to find out that I had this competition that he didn't know about. So that's going to be awesome. So the last piece that we're going to get into is reinforcement with this. Okay, so I have to point some people out. So remember the 3-year-old? That's him now. Right? This short little dude next to him is my dad. All of the children in this picture are my grandchildren, and this is my daughter. Right? And then someone who really helped as a support system, this little guy in the back that looks like a lumberjack. That's my best friend. And these are the people who really supported through this process. So we start reinforcement with this idea of celebration. You would think that we would start reinforcement with how do we audit success. And what I have found is that if we focus on the audit or the compliance portion first, that we don't truly reinforce behaviors. Because it's really easy to hide bad behaviors. That's how I ended up in drug addict in the first place. Right? But we can focus on the first time that I get my 1-year coin. I got ice cream for that. We can focus on the first time that I spent money on a soccer game for my kid instead of my drugs. We can focus on the first job, the first apartment, the first car. There are so many options to be able to celebrate. And I'm telling you now, my celebrations have gotten slightly bigger. I'm going to Greece. Okay? But we focus on that idea of celebration in reinforcement before we focus on audit. When we get into the audit portion, remember I told you that I reflect once a year? Part of that reflection is what did I not do that I said I was going to do? And does that thing serve me anymore? It may or it may not. If it still serves me, what do I need to put in place to make sure it happens? And what am I going to add to my list next? As I said, I can't future trip. That's a really unhealthy place for me to be. So 1 year is my limit. That's why I do this on my birthday. And occasionally I check in. I'll go to random AA or NA meetings. I'll run across people who I know are clean and sober, have a really good conversation about that. I can tell you that during COVID, I call it had an accident. I was isolated, and anybody who is in this world knows isolation is the biggest no-no, but COVID couldn't prevent that. And so in order to combat that, I had to go get a dog. And my Charlie boy, and I believe he's in this picture. Oh no, he ran off. He does that. He's kind of a big boy. And he really gave me some entertainment during COVID, so I didn't have that isolation. Luckily, I come from a culture who doesn't believe that only people are there to talk to. So that's pretty cool, because I get to experience different personalities. Unfortunately, the trees talking to me, they were a little quiet, and it took too long to talk. So, and I don't know what my time is right now.
It is 2:43.
Oh, I am doing so good. All right. So again, you have questions here that you can answer on your sheet, but one of the things that you may notice is that this is something that you are currently working on, that if this is not a past change, you may not have answers to this yet. That's okay. That's why I gave you a handout. So you can take it home. Now, I want you to notice that each one of the elements in the ADCAR model, I had to complete one step at a time. It was a linear process, but it's not necessarily sequential. Meaning that if I gave new information, I may slip all the way down to desire in the ADCAR model, and I have to focus again on that, and then I have to move up the steps, right? I may just get to knowledge, oh, something threw me sideways, and I may have to gain some skill sets for me to do the next thing, right? For me to move to that ability again. And that's okay. Going up and down the ADCAR model is perfectly okay. I'm going to let you know that my story really has not ended. I'm still a drug addict. Notice I don't use the word recovering drug addict. Somebody called me on that once. I will always be a drug addict. If you put a line in front of me right now, I would be like, hey, let's go. We're going to have one interesting week, and I'm going to suffer next week. That's just who I am. I'm always going to be a drug addict. I just don't use it right now. That's okay. But one of the things that my daddy always told me is never strive toward mediocrity. So if I was going to use today, wow, I would not be the person I am today, and I am amazing. And this is what ADCAR does for me. So I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope it brought some lessons for you that either reinforces what you're doing or gave you some extra techniques to try. My contact information is there. Does anybody have any questions?
Congratulations on 21 years.
Thank you. Nothing? Like that's all I did is...
And yes, you are amazing.
Thank you, Rob. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm honored that you're willing to listen. Yes, ma'am?
I found you very captivating. I appreciate that. One thing that I know I struggled with in the past was like the powerlessness thing that comes up in the 12 steps and like saying you're forever an addict. Like I personally could never do that. That was like something I could never say it. Like, and it was like, I remember being in those programs and them wanting me to say that and I could never do it. I was like, no, because that's not true. I am who I am. I'm going to overcome all these things that I've come into. You know, I couldn't give myself into that powerlessness or this label.
What I can tell you is in the beginning, when I needed those 12 steps, I was powerless.
Mm-hmm.
I had no control over me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Today, in my recovery, I can tell you that this is something I did. These were my choices. I can blame it on others. But these were my choices. This was my energy and my power that was extended. And I get to have the choice. I have the power to choose what direction I go today. I get to walk my path. And that can be a good red road or not so much.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I never wanted to say I was powerless. Because even though I still took complete accountability of my choices. Like that was my choice. Yeah, that's true.
Good for you.
Yeah,
strong,
no, I dig
confident
it.
woman.
Oh, I don't know. Those are my days.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I was just going to mention, when you say like, I'm still an addict, I think that's such a powerful thing for a lot of people that are going through certain struggles, because for so much more than just one thing. I always think that's important to point out, like, just because maybe this one part of your life is associated with you doesn't mean that all these other things about you aren't true as well. You know? So always important to recognize.
Thank you. Yes?
In ADCAR, and especially with folks recovering, there's that animus, that anxious energy to change that somebody develops. You need to make sure that they go through the awareness and desire, because if they go straight to SMART plans, they're gonna falter. They need to be able to fall back on the why am I doing this, what are the pros and the cons, to keep them on the right path.
And it depends on the person. So when I first started having those conversations, was the first day that I went to the treatment and they did the assessment. They started asking me similar questions. Obviously not exactly, but they started asking me similar questions so that I was starting to think down that road even from that first day. I did not really understand how to set a goal until after I had food, roof, and safety. Once I had food, roof, and safety, then I could start drinking. So a lot of times it's taking care of those base needs first, and then you can start really having those conversations.
I don't even remember my first day.
Pardon me?
I don't even remember my first day. Did you take anything?
Oh yeah, I was lucky because I had like 2 days. I had 2 days of sobering up because I was afraid of the withdrawals.
I died in May. My wife had to bring me back.
I've heard that story. I had a friend who experienced that story, and I had some friends who didn't make it through that story. Good for you.
Did you when I was sick?
And good for your wife.
Yeah.
Like, you need to kiss him.
Well, yeah, for sure. It doesn't go unsaid.
All right, well, that's all I have for you today. I'm around. Everyone travel safe, please.
Yeah.